audience.
Mm-hmm.
Starting now, I affirm the resolution plea bargaining ought to be abolished in the United States criminal justice system. Thus, the role of the ballot is to vote for the debater who not only best sets a universal set of guidelines for morality, but instead establishes a society that upholds their commitments to their citizens uniformly and consistently, allowing for equality to be preserved. When a government selectively enforces their obligations to individuals, they are arbitrarily privileging one group of citizens over another, which is inconsistent both ethically and with the purpose of the government. The purpose of the government is to afford and protect their stated commitments to their citizens. These commitments are embodied through laws, policy, and rights, which all establish governmental obligations and duties to their people. So, when governments fail to fully uphold their own promised obligations to their citizens universally, they cease to be ethical since they negate their own purpose. For this reason, governments must be non-arbitrary in upholding their stated obligations and commitments to their citizens. Contention 1, plea bargaining destroys judicial integrity. From Fine 86, quote, plea bargaining teaches the criminal that judges and lawyers can ignore the law when it is timely to do so. Significantly, many plea bargains result in charges that cannot be sustained by the facts. One common plea bargain in Wisconsin is to reduce a charge of operating a vehicle without the owner's consent, a 2-year felony, to joyriding, a 9-month misdemeanor, even though the car may have been damaged and the return of the vehicle undamaged within 24 hours is an element of the misdemeanor charge. Plea bargaining often destroys the integrity of the criminal justice system by allowing defendants to appear convicted of crimes different from the ones they have actually committed. If we want defendants to respect the law, we must enforce it with justice and honesty. From the University of Arizona at Little Rock Law Review, quote, Judge Alceo made his view of plea bargaining clear when he refused to hear the plea agreement in the United States versus Griffin. He is quoted saying, quote, it is the court's opinion that the process of negotiating pleas has a tendency to demean all participants, the attorneys, the defendant, and even the court. They are backroom sinister implications, albeit unjustified, which simply cannot be removed. The result is public cynicism and lack of faith in the integrity of the judicial process, end quote. By destroying judicial integrity, citizens will have less trust in the criminal justice system and further the government. Furthermore, when the laws are not being enforced justly, governments are negating their own purpose. Contention 2. Plea bargaining is inconsistent. The norms surrounding plea bargains are inconsistent. There is no clear legal solution when the crime someone pleads to is later overturned. The result is unjust and unequal treatment. From Palmer 98, quote, courts treat plea bargaining as a contract and the bargaining that induces it is simply another type of contractual transaction. The problem is when a defendant's conviction must be vacated under the retroactive application of either a new law or a new interpretation of that law, which no longer makes the charge pled to illegal. The courts have wrestled with the question of whether or not charges dropped pursuant to a plea agreement may be reinstated once the initial charge has been vacated, end quote. Because plea bargaining is inconsistent and thus cannot be done fairly, plea bargaining prohibits the government from upholding their duties to their citizens equally and consistently, prohibiting the treatment of citizens as moral equals. Contention 3, plea bargains destroys due process by being inherently coercive. The very idea that the state might proactively encourage the waiving of constitutional due process is at odds with the maintenance of such a due process as a check on the state. From New Darley et al. 88, quote, the manipulation of power entrusted to public officials to coerce defendants into yielding important constitutional rights is anathema to those who claim that steadfast adherence to strict procedural safeguards to the law is our main assurance that there will be equal justice under the law. The very possibility of such manipulations breeds contempt and resentment instead of remorse and resolve on the part of the defendant and undermines the justice system's credibility and legitimacy in the eyes of the public, end quote. Careful moral reasoning indicates that plea bargaining remains coercive even if the threat is something that the prosecutor was under no legal obligation not to threaten. From Kipnis 78, quote, a victim is drowning and a bystander is in a position where he alone can save the victim's life. He can do this costlessly by moving his arm. The bystander offers to save the victim's life if he agrees to do whatever the bystander asks of him. The victim agrees and is saved but challenges the agreement in court. Should the terms of the agreement be honored by the legal system? Under the current law, the bystander has no legal duty to intervene on behalf of the victim. Both parties are better as a result of the agreement. The victim is alive and the bystander has an unlimited right to the victim's services and property. Nonetheless, at least two separate arguments can be marshaled in support for the contention that the agreement should not be legally enforceable. Moreover, each directs us to similar concerns about the legitimacy of plea bargaining. The first begins with the dire predicament of the victim. Persons who are precariously situated or otherwise hard-pressed by circumstance have a strong claim to special consideration by social institutions. We typically continue to pay people their salaries although they are too ill to work. We apply special traffic regulations to persons who are driving to funerals. We allow people to declare bankruptcy when they have made a mess of their financial affairs. We are beginning to consider that vital medical care may not be just another consumer good in the marketplace, that desperately ill have a claim to social resources. The second argument, instead of concentrating on the predicament of the victim, focuses rather on the terms of the agreement. What is it exactly that the bystander is demanding of the victim? Is it something that the victim is entitled to give up, or is it something to which he has an inalienable right? The law does not honor agreements in which one party consents to become the slave of another, even when it is clear that the former consented and both prefer the agreement. We may reasonably choose a legal system in which a person cannot alienate his freedom, inalienable rights, which are given up under plea bargaining. From Klein 04, quote, while walking down the street, Marcus and Alfred passed a boy that they recognized from school. Marcus approached the boy and demanded the boy's backpack. Marcus pulled out $40, shoved the boy down, and walked off. Alfred stood by watching, and then walked away in the same direction as Marcus. The police later arrested both Marcus and Alfred, and the prosecutor charged them with robbery and street terrorism. Although Alfred did not actively participate in this event, the prosecutor charged him under the accomplice theory of criminal liability, for which he could face up to 16 years in prison. Thus, I affirm. Thank you.
Ready for cross-ex?
Just an all-time thing. If you guys weren't reading along, I didn't finish this
Yeah, I
part,
know.
so.
It's all good. Everyone ready?
Yeah.
Alright, so let's talk about your role of the ballot. So what's the warrant for why this framework operates on a pre-fiat level?
I'm sorry. So the reason we're going to be looking to this role of the ballot, again, is we're looking for, the way that we have to look at it is we're looking for a government that can uphold its commitments to its citizens uniformly and consistently.
Yeah, I get that, but why is it not just simply a value criterion or a standard? Like, what makes it operate on a pre-fiat level? Saying that, like, the role of the ballot, like how the ballot should function is to vote for the debater who best sets a universal set of guidelines.
Because we're going to be, we can't affirm or negate without first creating the society that will uphold its commitments to its citizens uniformly and consistently.
Well, you're still not getting to my point. Like, what pre-fiat warrants for why this functions as a higher layer than just a value criterion or a standard is there in your framework?
I can reread the framework if you want, but it's up to you.
So let's talk about it. So you talk about these commitments. What are the commitments of a government? What is the obligation of a government?
So the obligation of a government is to afford and protect its stated commitments to its citizens.
And what are those stated commitments?
Whatever is written in their laws and policy and rights.
What if the commitment's something that's not so beneficial to it? Is there certain like inherent commitments that all governments have to their citizens, or is it very like whatever's in the Constitution, or does it go country by country, or are there certain commitments that are universal?
If you want to go country by country, we can, since the resolution specifically states the United States. And even if we do that, we still have to look to the government because, again, the United States government was formed on the basis of the Lockean social contract, where some rights were given up to the government to ensure better protection of others.
Okay. Now let's go to your third contention, where we talk about how there's a denial of due process.
Correct.
Isn't it true that plea bargaining is still just simply an offer? Like, you have the option to take the offer of a lower sentence, or you can still go to trial and exercise your constitutional rights?
So plea bargaining is coercive, but like you said, it is an offer, but it's an agreement more than an offer necessarily. So while like on basis, like the definition of an offer, like plea bargaining fits under that definition, like through semantics, yes, but we also have to look to the fact that it's an agreement and it is inherently coercive.
Okay, but why is it coercive?
Because if I would have finished my last card, we would have seen this, especially through this example from Klein 04. Alfred was coerced into pleading guilty to a crime that he didn't commit, just because it was going to save them time.
Okay. Do you think that plea bargaining should be abolished in all cases?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, personally, yes.
Yeah. All right.
Under the affirmative case, yes.
Then let's talk about contention 2. So you say plea bargaining is inconsistent. Inconsistent with what?
The Palmer 98 card shows that it's inconsistent because it applies the laws differently every time, or it's a new application of the law differently every time. So because the law isn't being applied the same, or it's not being interpreted the same every time, it's...
But wouldn't you agree that the law should be applied on a case-by-case basis?
Okay, what we have to look to is, yes, there's circumstantial evidence that makes each case different, but, can I answer that? So it makes each case different, but we still have to apply the law with the same fairness to everyone.
Okay, cool. We'll begin running preparation time. Time starts now. Part 1 is the concert. Lil Pump's lyrics are nothing less of a genuine life lesson. People don't understand the story behind the lyrics. I'll do a lyrical breakdown. Pump 17. Gucci gang, 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 Gucci gang. Lil Pump is telling his target audience that his gang is indeed called Gucci Gang. He says this in order to set the tone for the rest of the song and will show what his gang is all about. Pump 17. Spend 3 racks on a new chain, yeah. My bit love do cocaine, ooh. Lil Pump is explaining that his gang can in fact afford a chain that's $3,000. Lil Pump is being humble and showing that even if he's rich, he'll still pay money for a cheap chain. On the line, my bid loves you cocaine, ooh. Lil Pump is alluding to the fact that his bid is on so much cocaine that she can barely speak, which is why he says bid and love instead of bitch and love. Pump 17. I bought a bitch, I forgot her name. I can't buy a bitch or wedding ring, rather go and buy Balmains. Lil Pump is trying to say that he's not loyal at all and is trying to lower a chance of him getting a real girlfriend out ever. All Lil Pump wants to do is make relations with a lot of women and try and avoid any STDs. Pump 17. My lean costs more than your rent. Ooh, it do. Lil Pump is saying that he's willing to waste a large amount of money for drugs, showing his more emotional side. He needs these drugs to get over that he failed school. The ad-libs helps the listener understand that it actually does cost more than your rent. Pump 17. Me and my grandma take meds. Ooh. Lil Pump again has returned to this emotional side, saying that his grandma is in fact a vegetable and she needs meds to survive. This makes Lil Pump very depressed, so he's willing to take Xanax for his depression. Pump 17. Fuck your airline, fuck your company, fuck it. Lil Pump is kicked off a plane just because he was screaming his shit and somehow being obnoxious on the plane. I still don't know why he was kicked off. The only person that matters in the world is Lil Pump, so who cares if people can't sleep or relax on a 24-hour flight. Pump 17. They kicked me out of a plane off a Percocet. Now Lil Pump flying private jet. Yeah, everyone scream fuck WestJet, fuck him. Lil Pump's alluding to the fact that he was kicked off the plane for using an illegal substance. This is entirely WestJet's fault. They should have either gave everyone drugs or kicked them off except Lil Pump. Pump 17. Spend 20 racks on a picky ring, walk in the club with a diamond chain. Pump is delineating the fact that he has expended a sum of 20 racks, equivalent in value of 20,000 American dollars or 1.402 Bitcoin. This price, however, may have changed slightly by the time of reading this because of the currency's volatility, which is also equivalent to 487.994 Ethereum, which is the same as 1,510,501.50 Dogecoin. And Pump's evidence outweighs our other carded evidence because 1, his lyrics are performative narrative, which is uniquely preferable to empirics because it brings emotional and personal experiences into the debate round. 2, he's a graduate of Harvard Medical School, meaning he's qualified, and coincidentally, we're actually at Harvard. 3, the songs quoted are from 2017, meaning the most recent evidence available. Part 2 is the links. The affirmative endorsement that stays inaccurate goes against the most principle of the Gucci Gang. So let's get it. Pump 17. Yeah. Lil Pump. Yeah. And the affirmative's omission of discussing the effects plea bargaining has on the diamond mining industry also undermines the Gucci Gang's efforts. Diamonds are uniquely key to the Gucci Gang. Pump 17. Diamonds on my wrist. Bitch, it's Gucci Gang. Yeah. Iced out chain. Iced out ring. Yeah. Part 3 is the impacts. Like ignoring the Gucci Gang, the F is perpetuating exclusion. Although their method, Pump's methods might be orthodox, he's a rising rapper who does not deserve to be excluded. The alt solves. Part 4 is the alt. The alternative is to embrace the Gucci Gang and join the growing membership. Its most important principle is get it or let's get it, which is a youthful call to rise up against authority. However, it is a tool to be used wisely against oppressive power structures. So if you vote for the K, then you solve in other areas of oppression. Second off. The F aims for desired ends, takes the joy of life and goes against the current of the Tao of the way, increasing the inevitable suffering of the universe. Turns case, Slaughter 1. Curse the face reality is the only way to deal suffering, the acceptance of the inevitable, suffering, bearable, plans, objectives, aims, objectives, and agendas become aversive suffering, so many agendas take the joy of life. The moment aims become egocentric, your suffering increases the world is sacred, politicians show endurance by tampering with the sacred, and running the process the sources of ending suffering. Whoever relies on the Tao and governing doesn't try to force issue, affirmative forces the kind of force of the universe out of control, trying to dominate events goes against the Tao. No one knows what's right or wrong, so reject the F judgments, even if we lose all life on Earth. Kirkland 98. Humans quickly judge events on the basis of simplistic assumptions. For example, that life is better than death. Otherwise, the wise learns to question, discard, such and foregoes such judgment regarding events. Changes catch up to us. Even the extent the planet becomes permanently void of life, the response will be logically such as nature, and crying over such will be silly. The truth of events is not apparent to the party experiencing them. If one who here loses atrocity could have been prevented by refraining and from leaping to save an endangered child, how can we possibly know what is truly justified? Who can know when event is truly a tragedy? When life faces a sudden turn, a mature person calms emotions, accept a new state of things. Alt, become in sync with the Tao by living like water, embracing the Wu Wei. This means foregoing all actions attempting to achieve desired end. Kirkland 96. The Tao is humble, yielding, and unassertive. It benefits others selflessly, gives us all life, and guides us safely through it. Water is the gentlest and most yielding of all things, yet it can overcome the strong substance and cannot be destroyed. Water lives for others and provides the basis of all life for other things. If we live like water, we'll still be living in accordance with the Tao, and it will carry us safely through life. Such a way is called Wu Wei, translated as non-action, foregoing activity intended to affect our desired ends. One should follow one's natural course and allow all to do likewise. Third off. Counterplan text, plea bargain must be vouched for defense accused of a sex offense in the United States criminal justice system, except in cases where the victim agrees to a plea bargain. Ronell 9. What weight should be given to a sexual assault victim's request that testifies a counterweight against the signing of a plea bargain? Sometimes an actual desire to save the victim from the need to testify. Consideration that frequently arises in sexual offense cases that is a significant factor in the decision to sign a plea bargain. No two victims are like each victim suffered trauma in each individual case. The wish of the specific victim must be examined separately. Net benefits 1. Requiring sexual assault survivors to go through the trial process forces them to relieve their trauma in courts that cause psychological violence in outweighs. Stewart. Survivors often debate about the court's incentive treatment of them and cross-examination techniques. The court may process may feel raped all over again. It took me long to get over the court's experience, but then the actual rape victims of the case went to court. When our report is sold, go to court again and give them the choice. There's no difference between being raped and given evidence and time. This time happens in front of a crowd. Aaron Ed. Lack of other evidence in which sources means the defendant will be let free. The survivor doesn't testify. White 13. What happens if the complainant witness doesn't want to testify? A person can refuse to testify. The only way to successfully prosecute the defendant is if the complainant witness testifies. There's no testimony from the person who's claiming abuse. The case was then to be dismissed. Outweighs F offense. Even if plea bargains decrease the severity of the punishment, it will allow some punishment without forcing the survivor to endure psychological trauma, which is better than none. Skip the second card. Go to the case. So on the role of development, my opponent talks about being conformed to a universal set of guidelines for government. But again, she has no pre-fiat impact here. This is just saying that this moral framework is good. So this should develop like a value criterion or a standard. She never has pre-fiat warrants for out-of-round impacts regarding her framework. But moreover, she talks about how the purpose of government is to afford and protect stated commitments, but cross-apply the Dowka here. So this indicts this assumption because I'm thinking that the government should have zero to little assumptions, little commitments. It should act like water and be very passive and embrace the Tao in the Wu way. And under such said commitments of Taoism, there would be no obligation to abolish plea bargaining. So therefore, I actually have offense under her framework. So even if you don't buy the counterplan or the pump K, you can view my case and turn under her framework. Now is an overview to the contentions. Group contention 1, 2, and 3. The counterplan solves better. It does all these things. Abolishing plea bargaining is great, except in cases of rape, because some of the victims don't want to endure the psychological trauma. So they should be given the option to not have to testify in court and go through that trial process. And even if you don't know by any of this, the pump K outweighs. It's a performance. Pump is the most credible evidence in the round. Thus, I negate.
Opponent ready?
Yeah.
Judge? Audience? Starting now. So how does one weigh under the performance K? Like, do I just have to play a little pump song?
I don't really have a framework. I'm just saying that the performance evidence should outweigh empirics.
The little pump?
Yeah.
Okay. Outweigh empirics how?
Well, I talk about how narratives bring emotion and personal experiences into the rounds, and not just desensitizing these people who are experiencing certain things as numbers and groups.
Also, can you go over, you talk about living in Wu Wei and Taoism. Can you explain that to me a little bit more?
Yeah. So basically, I'm saying that the government should be as non-interventionist as possible, because basically, the more action we take, the more desired ends we have, like the more aims we have as a government, as a society, then at least the more suffering. And
so what is the purpose of the government under your ideas here, under Wuism and Tao?
Well, it's a very passive government, so it'd be something very, very simplistic. There's no actual Taoist governments right now, so I can't give you a model that's in current day society, but it would kind of look like the Kirkland 96 cards, which talks about how we live like water the Wu way,
So
non-action.
what is the reasoning behind living like this?
Well, because what it does is it's passive, so it doesn't pursue desired ends, and as a result, we're not increasing the inevitable suffering in the world.
So how does this link into your rape counterplan? Or your sexual assault?
They're independent offs.
Okay. Can you go over your sexual offenders counterplan?
Yeah, so I'm saying abolish plea bargaining in all cases except sexual assault cases. I'm saying that basically the victim should have the option to have a plea bargain if they don't want to testify in court.
So why should we abolish plea bargaining for all other instances just except sexual offenders?
Yeah, because you're saying cross-outs, you're defending all instances of plea bargaining.
Okay. Why just sexual offenders?
Well, I'm saying that these victims uniquely feel emotional trauma and they don't want to go to court and experience this again.
Are they the only victims that feel emotional trauma?
I'm sorry?
Are they the only victims that feel emotional trauma?
They're the only one I'm advocating for. There's probably more, but I don't have evidence on it right now.
Okay. Also, can you just interpret for me one more time what are the low pump lyrics, please?
What do you mean? Like, do you want me to go through the K again, like line by line?
No, just one of the lyrics. Can you just repeat?
Which one?
Any one of them.
Alright. I'm gonna go with my lean costs more than your rent. Ooh.
Those are the questions I'll ask.
Okay.
I'd like to take running prep starting now, please.
I saw you were flowing during the little pump K. What were you writing? What was there to write?
G.
Need that abbreviation.
Nice.
I did flow the lyrics.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I had something. Like, I don't know if it was like a spike in it or something. No.
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
To answer your question, you can do whatever you want.
Okay.
I don't think there's really any rules.
There's no, well, yeah.
So top down. So it's going to start with the NC, or no, the Lil Pump K, and then the counterclaim, and then AC.
What about the Taoism K?
Oh yeah, that's after the first sexual assault. Sorry. Everyone ready? Starting now with the Lil Pump case. So my opponent only reads evidence, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang. But this really has no weight in the round. My opponent says that it's only some sort of emotional appeal that we should look to it first because it's a narrative, but this is false. This is just a Spotify rapper that he's trying to promote in this round. Again, all of his lyrics are basically words that my opponent can interpret. So we can take any song and interpret these lyrics, and it can be a narrative, but it shouldn't have any weight in the round. But moving on to the sexual assault K, or counterclaim. My opponent tries to promote this idea that he wants to abolish every other form of plea bargaining, so he's inherently affirming, but the only thing he doesn't want to abolish plea bargaining for is sexual offenders. The reason that we can't look to this is because my opponent is only advocating for these victims. He's saying these are the only victims that are being hurt by this idea of not abolishing plea bargaining. So the reason that we're not going to be looking to this counterclaim is because it's not like the sexual offenders are getting off free. They will be getting a reduced charge, yes, but it will always be proportionate to the crimes that they were committed. So I don't really see what my opponent's trying to do here, but we're going to be abolishing plea bargaining because, again, it is a reduced sentence that they will be getting, and it's not going to be proportionate to the crimes they were committed. Sorry for any confusion there. But again, it does need to be abolished because, as I read in my case, my opponent is advocating for every individual in the American government. Moving on to the Taoism K, my opponent tries to read that we should live within a government which is least interventionist as possible. This really clashes against the affirmative role of the ballot, if we can see here, because my opponent tries to read that he wants to remain with this government least interventionist as possible, but again, he can't even provide an example of a government that is this way. So we can't, so if there's not a government currently this way, we can't even look to it because there's no example to be followed. Moving forward, again, the American government is one that was formed through the idea of the Lockean social contract, where we give rights to get rights protected. So the reason we're going to be looking to the affirmative framework in this is because we already have a system of government in place that is working correctly. My opponent tries to say that he wants to get one where it's least interventionist as possible for no inherent reason, and it doesn't even link to his counterclaim or his Lil Pump case, which should be disregarded. Moving on to the affirmative case. My opponent just says that there's no pre-fiat impact for my roll of the ballot. So even if you buy that argument and you don't buy the roll of the ballot, you still have to look to the fact that I'm the only one here that provides a roll of the ballot. My opponent only provides lyrics that say, "I found a bib, forgot her name, brr, yeah, can't buy a bib, no running ring, ooh, rather, yeah, whatever." That's not even empirics. My opponent says that we can look to it because it's the first one I read. Again, we can take any song and apply it to this, so it doesn't even matter. This is just Lil Pump. I mean, I know he was a graduate of Harvard Medical School, but come on, I provide statistics that apply to the real world here. We have to look to these first. They have a greater impact. Moving on, my opponent just clumps all three of my contentions together and just say that his sexual assault counterclaim weighs better, but we have to look to the fact that my opponent, again, is only trying to take these rape victims and prioritize them above others. But again, in the roll of the ballot, I read that we have to be valuing this idea because when we choose this arbitrary deviation, we are privileging one group of people over everybody else. So again, my opponent only accounts for these rape victims, and he doesn't even account for the individuals, which the affirmative case does way better than the negative. Moving on, he doesn't even address any of the cards that were mentioned in any of the contentions, and this is really important because these can be extended across, but again, these cards basically show why plea bargaining is inconsistent, why it destroys judicial integrity, and why it destroys due process through the use of coercion. And even if we exclude the last card in the third contention because it wasn't read in its entirety, still these contentions stand, and they stand strongly because they went unrefuted by my opponent, thus conceded. So even though my opponent says that we're going to be abolishing all forms of plea bargaining except sexual assault, he does concede all this evidence, and we will be abolishing all forms of plea bargaining. Thank you. I just want to apologize for my interpretation of the Lil Pump lyrics.
Don't worry about it. Hey,
His lyrics take a lot of intellectualism to interpret. Don't worry.
Scholars will study for years.
I think I have 221 left. So I'll start writing that. Ready? Alright. Time starts now. First, extend the narrative. We're going to play another song now. Whoops. Same song. and that one uniquely that way is because of the base drop. So now let's get to the actual K. So a lot of major concessions on the K. We're going to go line by line here. So extend part one, the concert here. So Pump's lyrics are nothing less than a genuine life lesson. So my opponent's only response is this has no weight in the round, and he's a mere Spotify rapper. But two things: he's a SoundCloud rapper, not a Spotify rapper. He just points out in turn his career. However, Spotify is the next step up in his career. He just recently got on Spotify, but they do have weight. This is really a story here, and there's really a lot of interpretation when it comes to these lyrics. They're literally being interpreted right now by English scholars at Oxford University. So sooner or later, you're gonna see a big thesis on Pump's paper, Pump's lyrics, and how their intellectual, existential philosophy that can change the world. But regardless, their cold heart conceded, extend each part. Spend 3 racks on a new chain, yeah. My bit, la, do, cocaine, ooh. And moreover, extend the weighing arguments, points 2 and 3 specifically. So Pump's evidence comes before any of my opponents because he's a graduate of Harvard Med School, meaning he's the most qualified person, and also his songs are from 2017, meaning they're the most recent. So they outweigh all my opponent's evidence. As stupid as it is, it's cold hard conceded. So now let's go to the links. It's a link of omission here. So the affirmative omission of discussing the effects plea bargaining has on the diamond mining industry undermines the Gucci Gang's efforts. And we know diamonds are uniquely key to Pump because he says, diamonds on my wrist, bitch, it's Gucci Gang. And moreover, the affirmative endorsement of the state as an actor, the state will be abolishing plea bargaining, goes against the most principle of the Gucci Gang. So let's get it. And also extend the impacts. Part 3, cold hard conceded. We're perpetuating exclusion. Moreover, the alt, again, cold hard conceded. We need to embrace the Gucci Gang and join the growing membership. It's the most important principle. Let's get it. And that's been cold hard conceded in this round. The alt solves. Now, Taoism. First, let's go through the links. Link was cold hard conceded. That's number 1. Extend that. So the S aim for desired end, which is in this case to abolish plea bargaining, takes the joy of life and increases the inevitable suffering of the universe. We just need to simply be passive and live like water. The impact is Coke 98. No one knows what's right or wrong, so just reject the F judgment, even if we lose all life on Earth, because things that we think are good at one point may be a bad decision in the long term, or vice versa. Like for example, if there's a baby Hitler drowning, would you save it if you didn't know if you knew it would be Hitler, or if you were back then in the 1930s, you wouldn't know if it was Hitler at the time. And then instead, Kirkland 96. That's the alt. So basically, we need to live like water and have it be a passive government of non-action, living like water, embracing the Wu Wei. This was cold hard conceded, and my opponent's only response is that there's no example, but there is. Taoist China in several millennia ago was a very prosperous government, and moreover, she says that Locke works correctly, so there's no point of switching to a Taoist government. But this is just another link into the K, assuming that Locke works correctly. The K is an indict to the entire philosophy of Locke and of really just pursuing ends in general. So the K says it's not correct, and moreover, to her fact that the K is like ineffective and can't actually be actualized. Taoism doesn't reject government, but looks to reject artificial and coercive power that prevents people from being in sync with the Tao. Marshall 9. The Taoist ideals of agrarian collectivism, which sought to capture unity with nature, human beings lost developing in an artificial and hierarchical culture. Peasants are naturally wise. They are framed from activity contrary to nature and realize in order to grow plants, they must understand and cooperate with the natural process. Just as plants grow best when allowed to follow nature, human beings thrive, and when these interfere with insight, let Taoists reject all imposed authority. If a ruler interferes with his or her people, rather than letting them follow their own devices, the sort of follow would be the social ideal would be a decentralized society in which goods are produced and shared in common with the help of appropriate technology. So basically an agrarian collective society, and which is very feasible. Now, counterplan. Also, major concessions here. So, first off, extend the solvency act, because that's where now I'm basically saying that abolish plea bargaining in all cases except for sexual assault cases, so we can give the victims an option to take a plea deal instead of having to testify in court. So, she says that I'm basically affirming except doing that, but she said in cross-eyes that she supports abolishing plea bargaining in all cases. So this is a different advocacy. The counterplan is comparatively better, even if it's just by a margin. I'm doing more impacts under her framework which are better, basically. And she says that there's other victims. That's great, but I'm still helping victims. That doesn't deny the fact that the counterplan is a better option than the affirmative, where no victims are being helped, and victims of rape are being forced to explain their case in front of hundreds of people potentially, a jury, a judge, spectators, witnesses. And extend Stewart, which talks about the psychological trauma experienced by this. She says no impact because these rapists are going to get disproportionate sentences, but actually extend White, which shows that they would actually rather have their perpetrator get a lower sentence than no sentence at all, because they don't want to go in court. So it's better than letting them get off scot-free because they don't want to testify in court. So it's the best option for both parties. The rapist gets their justice, or at least a decent amount of justice, while the victim does not have to endure that psychological trauma of going to court. Now, go to the AC. So, on the rolled about, she said that she's the only one with the rolled about. That's great, but extend my response that basically the K is an indict to this rolled about, saying that the government should have zero to little commitment, and therefore we should not abolish the plea bargaining under her framework. So basically, I have offense under her framework. Now, overall, as an overview to the AC, group of three contention, she extends her cards, but still the counterpoint itself is better. She said that I'm prioritizing victims of sexual assault over others, message an arbitrary deviation, but turn. Arbitrary deviations can be good. She gives no reason why it's inherently bad, and I showed it's better in this case because it's the best of both worlds. They don't have to go through this psychological experience, a traumatizing experience of having to testify a gruesome, terrible, traumatizing experience in front of others, which is basically reliving it with other people watching this time. So it is good in this case because it prevents that trauma from happening while also ensuring that the perpetrators get their justice. So to break down the round. So I have offense under my opponent's framework. The Dow K is basically a huge turn to a framework. And again, the link is conceded, 100% strength of link. We know the impact's conceded. So the only clash is over the alt. But I show with the Marshall card that it is a feasible government system. But I'm not advocating a specific policy, but rather a philosophical indictment of the 1AC. Also, Pump K was cold hard conceded, and this is going to be a huge impact in the round. Remember, Pump K outweighs, and moreover, Pump evidence is the most credible evidence in round. The guy went to Harvard. Thus, I negate.
Yep.
Starting now, instead of giving voting issues for the round, I'm just going to be going over the round in a brief summary just to show why the affirmative weighs better in many instances. First, we're going to hit the little pump case. So again, we've seen this K many times. My opponent tries to read that this personal narrative is way better just because it's it's this little pump. And he went to Harvard Medical School. Fun fact, that's just a meme. We can't even look to it. So again, we can't. I mean, these aren't empirical statistics that my opponent raised. He wastes critical time in his NC by reading these little pump lyrics. They're beautiful lyrics. I will admit to it, but we can't look to them. They're not empirical statistics. It's just an emotional narrative. We have to be preferring the affirmative for that reason. Next, we have to look at this Taoism K. My opponent tries to read that we have to be like water, and we have to, our government has to be this way and be the least interventionist as possible. But this can't be possible under his counterplan of leaving out or abolishing plea bargainings in every instance except sexual assault. So my opponent's counterplan doesn't even fit under this Taoism case. So even if they're completely separate from each other, we can't even look to it. Because again, even under the affirmative framework, which we will be valuing in this round, we can't even live like this. Because again, the only example my opponent can provide, which is in his last speech, he said he didn't have any in cross-sex, which contradicts himself. Again, is this example of Taoist China way back when? But again, obviously China isn't Taoist right now. We've seen the news recently, so we can't even look to this evidence because it's not even warranted. And again, it's moved on from being Taoist, so it obviously didn't work in the first place. Moving on to the sexual assault K that my opponent tries to read, that we must abolish all forms of plea bargaining other than sexual assault. But actually, plea deals don't bring justice or closure to rape survivors. Survivors aren't consulted, and rapists get lesser sentences. So anyways, even though my opponent tries to say that this will be justified, it actually won't. This plea deal won't actually help these rapist survivors, and my opponent only accounts for these victims. He doesn't account for the individual like the affirmative world does. My opponent just tries to account for these victims. He tries to take them and put one group above the other, which is inherently violating the role of the ballot, which is to not arbitrarily privilege one group over another, which does not treat people as moral equals as the role of the ballot states. Moving on to the affirmative case, my opponent just goes on to, again, to say that the role of ballot doesn't exist because there's no pre-fiat impact. But even if you buy that argument, again, the affirmative is the only one that provides that. My opponent can provide all the counter plans in case that he wants, but he doesn't have a role of ballot, so it can't even be looked to. Again, but even if it weighs under a value or value criterion, it still gets extended throughout the round because my opponent doesn't even hit it. The only thing he can say is there's no pre-fiat impact. So he doesn't even say why there's anything wrong with this role of the ballot or why it shouldn't stand just because there's no pre-fiat impact. Again, he only lumps my first three contentions together, and then says that his rape counter or sexual assault counter plan proves better solvency, but it doesn't because again it only accounts for these victims and not the individual the way the affirmative case does. Also, my opponent says I conceded to a lot of things in my last speech, but this is inherently false. As we can see, everybody's got a flow in front of us, so those can be extended. Again, I encourage an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
Very educational round.
Yes.
Oh yes, very educational. I do want to provide commentary, but there might be people waiting outside, so I want to just get out for that. It's just
Oh.